Every country tells a story about itself. France tells a story about culture and revolution. Britain tells a story about empire and resilience. China tells a story about 5,000 years of civilization. But no country in history has told its story quite as loudly, as expensively, or as globally as the United States of America. America is the greatest country on earth. You have heard the sentence your entire life. In Hollywood films and presidential speeches and military parades, in the fine print of every foreign policy decision that has shaped the world you live in. But here at Historic Finance, we do not accept stories at face value. We follow the money, we look at the mechanisms. We ask the question that the official story never wants to answer. How does power actually work? Who benefits? And what does history, the real history, not the textbook version, actually show us? Today we are applying that same lens to the most powerful idea in modern geopolitics, American exceptionalism. The belief that America is not just a powerful nation, but a fundamentally different kind of nation. A nation chosen by history, or by God, or by the logic of liberty itself to lead the world. Is it true? Is it myth? Or is it, as we often find here, something far more complicated and far more interesting than either answer? Stay with me for the next 60 minutes, because by the end of this video, you will never hear the phrase American exceptionalism the same way again. The Puritan seed, 1630. Before America was a country, it was an idea. In 1630, a Puritan lawyer named John Winthrop stood on a ship called the Arbella, crossing the Atlantic Ocean, and gave a sermon that would echo across 400 years. He told his fellow settlers, people who had left England to build a new life, that they were not just immigrants. They were a chosen people. They were building what he called a city upon a hill. He borrowed the phrase from the Sermon on the Mount, but he applied it to a piece of land, a literal place in the New World. Notice what Winthrop was doing. He was not describing greatness that had been achieved. He was declaring greatness that had been assigned. Before a single town had been built, before a single crop had been grown. This is the original DNA of American exceptionalism. Not a record of accomplishments, a feeling of destiny, a belief that this place was different from every other place in history. Now, here at Historic Finance, we always ask, who benefits from a particular story? Who gains power when people believe a certain narrative? In 1630, the answer was simple. The colonial project benefited. The investors in England who funded these voyages benefited. The ideology of divine mission made ordinary people willing to endure extraordinary hardship for a story about their special purpose. Sound familiar? We will come back to that pattern. 146 years after Winthrop's sermon, the feeling of destiny became a political document. The Declaration of Independence, written primarily by Thomas Jefferson in 1776, opens with one of the most ambitious sentences in human history. And we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. In 1776, no major government on earth was built on this principle. Every empire, British, French, Ottoman, Qing, was built on hierarchy, inherited power, and the right of the strong to rule the weak. Here was a new country declaring that rights came from nature itself, not from kings, not from armies, from simply being human. That was genuinely radical. The kind of radical that gets people killed, and did. But here is the financial historian's question. Thomas Jefferson, the man who wrote that all men are created equal, owned over 600 enslaved people during his lifetime. He built his personal wealth on their unpaid labor. He funded his lifestyle, his library, his scientific experiments, through the systematic exploitation of human beings he legally owned. This was not a small contradiction. This was the foundation of the American economy at the time. Enslaved labor was the engine of American agricultural wealth. Cotton, tobacco, sugar. The exports that gave America its first real economic power were produced by enslaved people. So the question at the very foundation of American history is not a small one. Was the Declaration of Independence the most important statement of human freedom ever written? Or was it the most eloquent cover story for an economic system built on exploitation? The honest answer, the historic finance answer, is it was both, simultaneously. And that duality is the key to understanding everything that follows. If you are finding this valuable, this is a good moment to subscribe to Historic Finance. We do this kind of deep dive investigation on every video. Hit the subscribe button and the bell so you never miss one. The painting that explains everything. In 1872, an artist named John Gast painted an image that became one of the most widely reproduced pictures in American history. A giant angelic woman floats westward across the continent. She's dressed in white, she carries a schoolbook, she strings telegraph wire behind her. In her wake, farms, railroads, towns, light. Fleeing before her into darkness, bears, wolves, and Native Americans. The painting was called American Progress, and it was not seen as propaganda. It was seen as a description of the natural order. This was manifest destiny. The belief that American expansion across the continent was not just desirable, not just profitable, but divinely ordained. God wanted Americans to go west. But here at Historic Finance, when we hear the word divine, We always ask, who is making money? The expansion westward was not primarily driven by individual pioneers seeking freedom. It was driven by capital. The Transcontinental Railroad, completed in 1869, was financed by the U.S. government handing over 170 million acres of land to private railroad companies. Land that had belonged to native nations for thousands of years was transferred, through legislation, to private investors in New York and London. The Pacific Railway Acts of 1862 and 1864 gave railroad companies not just the right of way, but entire townships of land on either side of the tracks, which they could sell to settlers and speculators. The railroad companies became some of the largest landowners and most powerful political forces in American history. The ideology of manifest destiny served this economic interest perfectly. If expansion was God's will, then the dispossession of native peoples was not theft, it was destiny. If it was destiny, it did not need to be justified. It only needed to be executed. Between 1776 and 1890, the U.S. government signed and broke over 370 treaties with Native American nations. Not a handful, 370. The Trail of Tears in the 1830s, the forced removal of the Cherokee, Choctaw, Muskogee, and other nations, killed an estimated 4,000 to 8,000 people from exposure, starvation, and disease, ordered by President Andrew Jackson, who remains on the American $20 bill. Because we are historic finance, and we follow facts, not agendas, we have to acknowledge what westward expansion also genuinely produced. The Homestead Act of 1862 gave 160 acres of land free to any citizen or immigrant who would farm it for 5 years. Millions of families, from Germany, Norway, Ireland, Eastern Europe, built real lives from nothing. First-generation immigrants became landowners in a way that was simply impossible in the rigid class structures of Europe. By 1900, the United States was the largest industrial economy on Earth. That economic power created real prosperity for real people, though distributed very unequally and built partly on land and labor that was taken by force. The story is not simple. It never is. That is why it is worth studying. June 6, 1944. Nearly 160,000 Allied troops stormed the beaches of Normandy, the largest seaborne invasion in history. By 1945, Nazi Germany had surrendered. The Holocaust had been stopped. Too late for 6 million Jews and millions of others, but stopped. The United States entered the war not out of pure altruism. Pearl Harbor forced the decision. But once they entered, American industrial and military output became genuinely decisive. The U.S. produced 300,000 aircraft, 86,000 tanks, and 8.8 million tons of merchant ships between 1941 and 1945. No other country came close. And then, here's where it gets interesting for us at Historic Finance, America did something that empires almost never do. It rebuilt the countries it had defeated. The Marshall Plan, announced in 1947, saw America spend the equivalent of $150 billion in today's money to rebuild war-destroyed Europe. West Germany was rebuilt, Japan was rebuilt. Former enemies became trading partners and military allies. Historians debate whether the Marshall Plan was pure generosity or strategic investment, and the answer is clearly both. A rebuilt Europe was a market for American goods and a buffer against Soviet expansion. Generosity and self-interest pointed in the same direction. But compare this to how the Roman Empire treated defeated enemies, or how the Soviet Union treated Eastern Europe after 1945. The difference is real. This is the part of American exceptionalism that deserves genuine credit. Here's where the historic finance investigation gets uncomfortable. In 1953, the CIA organized a coup to overthrow Mohammad Mossadegh, the democratically elected prime minister of Iran. His crime? He nationalized Iranian oil, threatening British petroleum and American oil interests. The U.S. reinstated the Shah, a monarch. Iran lost its democracy. The resentment of that intervention echoes in U.S.-Iran relations to this day. In 1954, the CIA orchestrated the removal of Jacobo Arbenz, Guatemala's elected president, who had proposed land reform that threatened the United Fruit Company, an American corporation. He was replaced by a military dictator. Guatemala descended into civil war for decades. In 1973, the Nixon administration supported the coup that removed Salvador Allende, Chile's elected socialist president, and installed General Pinochet, who tortured and killed thousands over the next 17 years. These are not conspiracy theories. These are documented in the CIA's own declassified files. Now connect this to what you already know from our previous videos on this channel. The dollar video showed you how the U.S. built a financial system that required the world to hold dollars. The sanctions video showed you how America uses financial exclusion as a weapon. Now you're seeing the pattern at its root. When democracy produces leaders who challenge American economic interests, democracy gets removed. Not with bombs first, with covert operations, with financial pressure, with the kind of power that leaves no fingerprints. That is not exceptionalism as a moral principle. That is exceptionalism as a business model. We are halfway through, and if this kind of deep financial history is what you come to YouTube for, Historic Finance is the channel for you. Subscribe now. Every video we make connects these dots further. On December 1st, 1955, a black seamstress named Rosa Parks sat in the front section of a Montgomery, Alabama bus and refused to give up her seat to a white man. She was arrested. What followed was one of the most remarkable nonviolent movements in the history of democracy. And here is the financial historian's observation about the civil rights movement. Its most powerful weapon was not disruption. It was the founding documents themselves. Martin Luther King stood at the Lincoln Memorial in 1963 and said, "I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal." He was using America's own story against America's own failures. He was holding the country accountable to its own mythology. And it worked, partially. The Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, that capacity for self-correction through its own institutional framework, using the Constitution, the courts, public pressure, and democratic process, is a genuinely exceptional feature of the American system. Other countries with similar levels of inequality did not produce this kind of internal reform movement with this kind of documented legal success. But here is the number that historic finance cannot ignore. The wealth gap between black and white Americans in 2024 is almost exactly what it was in 1968. 56 years after the Civil Rights Act, the median white family has approximately 8 times the wealth of the median black family. Legal equality was achieved. Economic equality was not. Why? Because legal rights and economic systems are different things. You can change a law in a day, changing who owns the land, the businesses, the financial assets. That takes generations. And active policies to redistribute those assets were never seriously implemented. The story of civil rights shows both the genuine power of the American idea and the limits of that idea when it confronts deeply embedded economic structures. Let us be precise. Here at Historic Finance, we deal in data, not ideology. Military reach. The United States maintains over 750 military bases in 80 countries. It spends more on defense than the next 10 countries combined. No empire in recorded history has had this kind of global military presence during peacetime. Financial dominance. The US dollar accounts for approximately 88% of all foreign exchange transactions globally. The SWIFT financial messaging system, which we covered in depth in our sanctions video, is effectively an American-controlled infrastructure. The IMF and World Bank, as we have explored in our last video, reflect American financial interests. This is an unprecedented concentration of financial power. America has produced more Nobel Prize winners than any other country by a wide margin. The internet, GPS, mRNA vaccine technology, the smartphone, the technologies that define modern life were largely created in America or by American-funded institutions. Immigration magnet. More people attempt to migrate to the United States than to any other country on Earth every single year. Whatever people say about America, millions vote with their feet. That revealed preference is meaningful data. But if American exceptionalism is a moral claim, not just a power claim, then the data on human well-being matters. Healthcare. The US spends more per person on healthcare than any developed nation, roughly double what Germany, France, or Japan spend. Yet American life expectancy is lower than all of them. Americans pay more and live shorter lives. Wealth inequality. The United States has the highest level of wealth inequality among all major developed economies. The top 1% of Americans own more wealth than the bottom 90% combined. This is not a progressive talking point. It is Federal Reserve data. Incarceration. The United States has the highest incarceration rate in the world. More people per capita in prison than Russia, China, or any authoritarian state that American politicians regularly criticize for human rights abuses. These numbers do not make America uniquely evil, but they do challenge the specific claim that America is not just powerful, but morally and functionally superior to other nations. The data suggests something more precise, a country of extraordinary achievements and persistent structural failures, often in the same areas, at the same time. We have spent this entire channel examining how the American financial system actually works. We showed you how the dollar became the world's reserve currency, not through natural market forces, but through specific political decisions made at Bretton Woods and reinforced through the petrodollar system. We showed you how sanctions work as a financial weapon, using dollar dominance to exclude countries from the global economy without firing a single bullet. We showed you how the IMF uses debt as leverage, attaching conditions to loans that reshape entire economies in ways that benefit creditor nations. American exceptionalism is the ideology that makes all of this feel legitimate. If America is exceptional, if it is the chosen defender of freedom and democracy, then its financial dominance is not imperialism. It is leadership. Its interventions are not self-interested. They are necessary. Its conditions on loans are not control. They are wisdom. The ideology and the financial system reinforce each other. That is what makes American exceptionalism so important to understand. It is not just a story Americans tell about themselves. It is the intellectual foundation of the most powerful financial system in human history. So, after 60 minutes, what is the answer? Is American exceptionalism a myth or a reality? Here is the historic finance verdict. As a description of power, it is real. No country in history has accumulated this combination of military reach, financial dominance, and cultural influence in this short a period of time. That is factual. As a moral claim, as a reason to exempt America from the same scrutiny we apply to every other powerful nation, it is a story. A very expensive, very effective, very consequential story. And here is the thing about stories that justify power. They are always told by the people who benefit from that power. The British Empire told a story about the civilizing mission. The Spanish Empire told a story about spreading Christianity. The Soviet Union told a story about liberating the working class. Every empire in history has had an ideology that made its expansion feel like a gift to the world. American exceptionalism is America's version of that story, which does not mean it is entirely false. The Marshall Plan was real. The Civil Rights Movement was real. The innovations are real. But it means that when you hear the phrase, when you see it used to justify a financial policy, a military intervention, a loan condition, you now know to ask the question we always ask here. Follow the money? Who benefits? Because the answer to that question will tell you more truth than any official story ever will. If this video changed how you think about American power and financial history, that is exactly what Historic Finance is here to do. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Every single video we release goes this deep. The next video in this series is coming very soon, and you do not want to miss it. Every system of power has a story it tells about itself. Our job, your job, now that you have found this channel, is to look behind the story and find the mechanism. Thank you for watching Historic Finance. I will see you in the next one.